They laughed before he even touched the machine. Not nervous laughter, not polite laughter. The kind that comes from somewhere deep in the chest, the kind that says you don't belong here without needing to use those words at all. Reginald Ashworth was standing in the doorway of the largest industrial print facility in the Greater Toronto area, wearing a canvas jacket that had seen better days and holding a paper coffee cup from the Tim Hortons 3 blocks down. The floor manager, a man named Victor Pelletier, had spotted him from across the room and walked over with the kind of deliberate slowness that powerful men use when they want you to feel how much of their time you're wasting. "Can I help you?" Pelletier said. Not a question. A dismissal with a question. The room calmly. Sash Heidelberg looked offset printing presses, each one the size of a printing presses, each one the size of a city bus. 3 of them were running. One was idle, yellow caution tape strung across the front of it, and one, the newest, the most expensive, a machine that Pelletier's company had imported from Germany at a cost of just over $2 million, was completely dark. It had been dark for 11 days. "I'm here about the press," Ashworth said. Pelletier looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to the 2 technicians standing near the idle machine, men from a certified service company, men who had been flown in from Montreal the previous week at considerable expense, and one of them, without making eye contact with Ashworth, smiled at the floor. That was the laugh. Small, quiet, the kind that does more damage than a shout. "Sir," Pelletier said, "this is a restricted floor. Authorized personnel only." "I understand that," Ashworth said. "The machine you're looking at is a $2 million piece of precision equipment. We have specialists here. From the manufacturer's certified network, I can see that." Pelletier tilted his head slightly, the way a man does when he's deciding whether to be polite or efficient. He chose efficient. "So I'm going to have to ask you to. My name is Reginald Ashworth. I was called in by your head of operations, Donna Shepard. You can check with her if you like." A pause. Pelletier pulled out his phone. Ashworth waited. He was 61 years old. He had been waiting for moments like this for most of those 61 years, and he had learned somewhere around his late 40s that the waiting itself still wasn't the hard part. The hard part was keeping your hands loose, not giving anyone in the room the satisfaction of seeing you tighten. Pelletier's expression changed when Donna Shepard answered. Not a dramatic change. Just a slight rearrangement around the eyes. He hung up and looked at Ashworth with the specific blankness of a man recalibrating. "She says you're a print engineer, among other things," Ashworth said. "She didn't mention." Pelletier stopped himself. He was smart enough not to finish that sentence out loud. He didn't need to. Ashworth heard the end of it anyway. "She didn't mention you were black." Now, before we go any further, and if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know where this story is headed, and you know it's going to be worth staying for. Let's talk about who Reginald Ashworth actually was. Because Pelletier's assumption, which was shared by every single technician in that room that morning, was built on nothing except the canvas jacket and the Tim Hortons cup. It had nothing to do with information. It never does. Ashworth had grown up in Scarborough, East Toronto, in a house where his mother worked 2 jobs and his father worked 3. He was the kind of kid who took things apart. Radios, alarm clocks, the engine of a neighbor's lawnmower that had seized up one summer, and who had the unusual gift of being able to put them back together in a way that actually worked. Sometimes in a way that worked better than before. He had not gone to university in the traditional sense. He had completed 1 year of an engineering program at Ryerson before the money ran out, and he had spent the next 4 decades doing what the money had prevented him from doing formally, learning, obsessively, systematically, at night, on weekends, in the back of a print shop in Brampton, where he had started as a general laborer at 23 and had eventually become the person they called when the machine stopped. He had rebuilt presses that manufacturers had declared total losses. He had diagnosed electrical faults that stumped engineers with framed degrees on their walls. He had done this quietly, consistently, and without any of the credentials that would have made men like Pelletier extend him automatic respect upon walking through a door. He charged, it should be said, accordingly. His day rate was not cheap, Donna Shepard had agreed to it without blinking, because Donna Shepard had done her research. Victor Pelletier had not done his research. The two Montreal technicians were named, according to the laminates clipped to their shirts, Francois and Benoit. They had been on site for 6 days. They were certified by the manufacturer. They had run full diagnostics twice, replaced 3 components that their systems flagged as suspect, and the press had still not powered on correctly. It would start, run for approximately 40 seconds, and then shut itself down, with an error code that their diagnostic software translated as primary drive fault. Contact manufacturer. They had contacted the manufacturer. The manufacturer had suggested replacing the main drive controller, a part that cost $87,000 and had a 7-week lead time from Germany. This was the option that was currently on Pelletier's desk, in the form of a quote, and it was the option that Donna Shepard had decided to seek a second opinion on before signing. Ashworth set his coffee on a table near the wall. Not on any equipment, he was careful about that, and walked toward the press. He didn't rush. He moved around it the way you might move around a sleeping animal, taking in the whole shape of the thing before getting close. "Can you start it?" he said to Francois. Francois looked at Pelletier. Pelletier nodded, barely. The press powered up with a deep mechanical sound, a series of precise clicks and hums as the system ran its startup sequence. Ashworth stood and listened. After about 20 seconds, he crouched down near the lower left panel. His ear tilted toward the machine in a way that looked almost meditative. At 38 seconds, the press shut down. The error code appeared on the operator screen. "Again," Ashworth said. "We've run it over 60 times, Benoit said. The result is the same." "I know," Ashworth said. "Again, please." The press started a second time. This time Ashworth was standing at the side, not crouching. He was watching a specific section of the machine, and he was counting something under his breath, though nobody could hear what. It shut down again. There was a silence on the floor. The other presses continued their rhythm around them, a steady industrial heartbeat that made the quiet around this particular machine feel more pronounced. "There's a wiring harness on the secondary tension assembly," Ashworth said, "on the feed side. Third housing from the left." Francois frowned. "We checked the tension assembly. It was fine." "The assembly is fine," Ashworth said. "I'm talking about the harness, specifically about the ground wire in the harness. I want to look at it." Pelletier crossed his arms. "With respect, our technicians have run a full diagnostic." "I heard the relay stutter," Ashworth said. There was a pause. At 31 seconds both times, just before the fault triggers. "It's not in your diagnostic because the diagnostic is looking for component failure, and the component isn't failing. Something is interrupting its signal." Benoit and Francois exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that contained a very specific internal debate, the debate between professional skepticism and the possibility of being wrong in front of people. "May I?" Ashworth said, gesturing toward for a moment. Then, "Francois, get him the access tools." What happened next took approximately 22 minutes. Ashworth removed the panel on the feed side of the press. He traced the wiring harness with his hands, running his fingers along the conduit with a slowness that was almost uncomfortable to watch. The pace of someone who is actually looking, not performing looking. He reached the third housing and opened it. Inside, a bundle of wires, color-coded, clean, apparently intact. He asked for a flashlight. Benoit handed one over without comment. Ashworth shone the light at an angle, not straight in, but from the side so the shadows would show texture, and leaned in close. Then, he was still for a moment. Then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, "There it is." He stepped back and let Benoit look. The senior technician crouched down, angled the flashlight the same way, and was quiet for several seconds. The ground wire, one of 14 wires in the harness, a wire that carried no data, only a return current path for the drive system, had been seated incorrectly in its connector. Not broken, not corroded, seated wrong, by perhaps 2 millimeters. Enough to make solid contact most of the time, and intermittent contact under vibration, which is exactly what happened at 31 seconds into the startup cycle, when the press reached a specific operational speed and the vibration pattern changed. It had passed every static diagnostic because it was making contact when the machine was still. It only failed when the machine was moving. The manufacturer's diagnostic software, which ran its checks at startup before the machine reached full speed, had never caught it. Every component it checked was, technically, functional. Benoit stood up slowly. His expression was the expression of a man doing calculations he didn't particularly want to complete. "That's," he began. "Receded, it'll run," Ashworth said. "But I'd replace the connector housing while you're in there. The plastic has a microfracture. It'll happen again in 6 to 8 months otherwise." He stood up, picked up his coffee from the table, and took a sip. On the floor, Victor Pelletier had not moved. He was standing with his arms still crossed, but the geometry of his posture had changed in a way that was difficult to name precisely. Something in the shoulders, something that had gone out of them. They reseated the wire and replaced the housing. It took 40 minutes with the right tools, which the Montreal technicians had. Ashworth stood nearby, but did not involve himself in that part. It wasn't his job to do the repair. It was his job to find it. When they powered the press back on, it ran through its startup sequence and did not stop. It kept going. The sound of it, deepening and steadying, as it reached operational speed was, and there is really no other word for it, satisfying. The kind of sound a machine makes when it's finally doing what it was made to do. On the floor, 2 of the press operators, who had been watching from a distance, started walking back toward their stations. One of them, a woman who had been at the facility for 20 years, and who had never once in her working life needed a print press explained to her, caught Ashworth's eye as she passed, and gave him a single small nod. He gave one back. Pelletier walked over. He had the particular dignity of a man who was composing himself in real time, and he was doing a reasonable job of it. "I'll need to speak to Donna about the billing," he said. "That's between you and her," Ashworth said. A pause. "You said you heard the relay stutter." "Yes. How?" It wasn't quite a question. It was more like a man examining the edge of something he didn't understand and didn't want to appear to not understand. "You listen to enough machines," Ashworth said. "You learn what they sound like when something's wrong, even when they can't tell you themselves." Pelletier nodded slowly. He seemed to want to say something else, and then to decide against it, and then, because he was, underneath the assumptions and the crossed arms, a man with some honesty in him to decide for it after all. "I apologize," he said, "for how I spoke to you when you came in." Ashworth looked at him for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. He had learned, over 61 years, that accepting an apology with grace was not the same thing as letting someone off the hook. The record exists. The morning happened. Pelletier would carry what he had almost said. "She didn't mention you were black," for a good while, and whether he chose to examine it was his own business. Donna Shepherd met Ashworth in the lobby on his way out. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the brisk manner of someone who had managed people long enough to know that most problems were solvable if you called the right person. "Pelletier behaved himself?" she said. "Well enough," Ashworth said. She studied him. "I should have warned him. It's fine." "It's not, actually." She said it flatly, without drama, the way you state a fact you've stated before. "I should have done better. I'm sorry for that." Ashworth accepted this one too, but differently. With Pelletier, acceptance had been a formality. With Shepherd, it meant something, because she was doing the harder work of naming her own part in it. "Send me the report," she said. "Full findings. I want the manufacturer to see what $2 million of certified diagnostics missed." "I'll have it to you by Thursday," he said. She nodded. "I already told the board about you. 3 other facilities in the network. If you're willing." "I'm willing." He pushed through the glass doors into the October air, the kind of cold that settles into the city in the middle of the month when everyone is still slightly surprised that summer is actually over. He turned up the collar of the canvas jacket. A streetcar went past on King Street, its familiar rattle absorbed into the background noise of the city the way it always had been, long before he had any gray in his hair. He walked back toward the Tim Hortons. He had not been in a hurry this morning, and he was not in a hurry now. There is something worth saying here, before this story closes, and if you've made it this far, stick with it, because this part matters. There were 7 people in that facility who watched Reginald Ashworth walk through that door and made an immediate decision about who he was. 6 of them were wrong. The 7th was Donna Shepard, and she had done her homework. Ashworth had spent 40 years building something that had no plaque on the wall and no framed certificate in a lobby, just a reputation, moving through the industry at the speed that all real reputations move. Word of mouth, one solved problem at a time. He had rebuilt machines that manufacturers wanted to write off. He had trained younger technicians who are now, themselves, the people other people call. He had built a small business that employed 4 people and turned down more work than it accepted, because he had earned the right to be selective. None of that was visible in the canvas jacket. None of it was visible in the Tim Hortons cup. It was visible in what happened at 31 seconds into the startup cycle of a $2 million press, when every certified diagnostic in the building pointed, and a man who learned to listen to machines, and a man who learned to listen to in a Bram 38 years ago heard something that told him otherwise. The press ran the rest of that day without interruption. It ran the next day. It ran the day after that. Pelletier's facility made its deadline, which had been in serious jeopardy for 11 days. And the client, a national retail chain that had been watching the situation with increasing anxiety, received their materials on time. Ashworth's invoice was paid within 48 hours. He noted that, without particular satisfaction, he had long since stopped being surprised when competence was eventually recognized. He had also long since stopped pretending that the eventually didn't cost something. A few months later, Ashworth was standing in front of a room of 20 apprentice press technicians at a college in Hamilton. He had been invited to speak as part of an industry mentorship series, one of the quieter forms of recognition, less dramatic than a $2 million machine roaring back to life, but perhaps more important in the long run. A young woman in the back row. She couldn't have been more than 20. The kind of focused alertness in her face that Ashworth recognized as the look of someone who actually wanted to be in the room, raised her hand and asked him what she should know going into the trade. He thought about it for a moment. "Learn to listen," he said. "Not to what the manual says the sound should be, to what the machine is actually making. There's always a difference, and the difference is where the answer is." She wrote it down. He noticed that she was the only person in the room who had a notebook rather than a phone. He thought, watching her write, that she was going to be very good at this. He also thought that someone, somewhere, was eventually going to make an assumption about her when she walked through a door. He hoped she had the steadiness to wait it out. He hoped she had people around her who did their homework before she arrived. He didn't say any of that. It wasn't the right moment for it, but he looked at her, and he nodded once. The same nod the press operator had given him on the floor that October morning, and he moved on to the next question. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. Some things travel without words, from one generation of steady hands to the next, across rooms that were never quite built for them, but that they walked into anyway, and changed, and left better than they found them. Reginald Ashworth gathered his notes at the end of the hour, shook the hands that were offered to him, and drove home to Scarborough. The machines in the city kept running.